Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I have moved into my bedroom, as you can see, because of the better lighting in here. I've also taken with me some books that I have read in the month of May, which I would obviously like to talk about now. I read a total of 6.5 books in May. I will explain the half book later, but what annoys me is that one of the books was a new book I bought in May, and it's a beautiful paperback edition of a book that I borrowed to a friend after having read it. So I would have loved to be able to show it to you in this video, and it annoys me that I don't have it with me, but at least I have a few of the books I've read with me in physical copy. And yeah, that's the intro. Let's just get started. I read some interesting titles this month, one of which was a favorite of mine of this year so far, so I think I will save that for the last bit of the video because it was also the last book I read in the month of May. But let's start with the first book I read in this month of May. That is a beautiful yellow book. It's a non-fiction book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Laurie Gottlieb. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have heard about this book because it is a best-selling book of last year. I also believe it was part of the winners of the Goodreads Choice Awards of 2019. I've had my eyes on it for quite some months now, so I decided to finally get it. I read it and I really liked it. What I liked about this book is that it's a unique background information on what it's like to be a therapist, because it's written by a therapist who writes about her job and how she sees her job and the clients that she has. But it's also about this therapist who herself goes to seek her own therapist because she goes through some tumultuous things in life that make her life unstable, and she feels like she needs to talk to someone herself. So this is her account of that year in her life that was pretty chaotic, but a book came out of it and I really enjoyed reading it. As I said, it's a unique insight into what it's like to be in this profession, and there is something about therapists that fascinates me. I like hearing about how they have the patience to keep on listening and how they know how to give the right advice, because sometimes you might say something that is completely wrong, and I would be very afraid of doing that. But this was definitely an interesting way to read about those thoughts of hers and what it's like to be in this career. I think this was kind of a 4-star read for me. Definitely a good book. Next, I decided to pick up a reread, and that is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. I read this one the first time around a few years ago. Really liked it. Had forgotten about 2/3 of it by the time I reached May, and I found it at my mother's because I had handed it over to her. So I took it back, reread it, and I absolutely loved it once again. And it's just funny to love a book for the first time and then completely forget about it and then read it again and get that same experience. Even though it wasn't completely the same experience, I did remember bits and parts of it, but I didn't remember the overarching story, and that's what this second reread or this second read gave me. So if you don't know, this is historical fiction. Sarah Waters is very famous for writing about lesbians in historical times, and this one is set in London, and it's just a mind blow. It's one of those books with amazing twists in it, and I won't say too much about it other than it's about these two women and their relationship. You really get to know both women, their strengths and weaknesses, and as I said, it's a mind blow. So definitely one of the better books I have read of hers. This one is also a 4-star read for me, just because it does have a few dragging points, but overall I just really like this story. Now on to some of the library books I've read. First one was The Woman in the Mirror by Rebecca James. This one, it's one of those books where I was on the fence the whole time reading it about whether to keep on reading or to not read it anymore, to just DNF it. It's not that it was a bad book, it's just that it wasn't a book that grabbed me 100%. I felt like I kind of knew where it was going and I wasn't 100% invested in the story, but at the same time, when I picked it up, it was quite good and it was interesting to read. So I ended up finishing it. I think it's about a 2.5-star read for me. It's basically a fascinating gothic tale set in this house that's abandoned, and then we follow this woman in New York today who realizes that she has inherited this house which has some mysterious stories to it. Apparently people have died there, apparently it's haunted, and then we actually also get to hear the account of a woman who used to live in the house back 100 years ago. Obviously this is a gothic story, so the house is haunted and we do have some very dark settings of the sea and darkness and thunder, so I really like that. I also like how it has some references to Jane Eyre and it has all those cliches when it comes to gothic, so it was a pretty interesting read in that way. And also the yellow wallpaper, if you like that story by Charlotte Perkins, this one also has that in it, I think. So that was scary, that was eerie, but that mingled with the love story and the modern setting kind of felt a little bit too cliche for me in some way. It's hard to explain. I read it, I finished it, I gave it 2.5 stars, so that's enough for that book. Let's continue with the next one, which is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I finally got around to this book and I'm glad I did, because this was definitely an interesting story. A book I've never read the likes of before, or if I have, it's been a long time, because this is one of those books that you really don't have any idea what is going on. You just keep on reading and you feel like you are losing the plot and your sense of what is actually going on, especially towards the end where everything is just a blur and you're not really sure where you are in the story and where things are going. But if you like those kinds of stories, which I do once in a while, then this book might be for you. This one is about an underground library called the Starless Sea, and then we follow this student of a college in modern times America who stumbles across a book in the library, not the underground library, but in the college library, which has no author to it, no references. So he starts reading it and he realizes that this book has a chapter on his own life from when he was a child, which is very macabre and mysterious and eerie and all those words. So this realization, this discovery, takes him onto this great journey of finding the underground library and finding out what is going on. And that's all I can really say, because as I said, the further I got into the book, the more I felt like I was losing grip of the story, but I was still really enjoying it. So it was an interesting reading experience. I definitely loved the comfy feelings it gave me in the beginning and in the middle, but towards the end I did feel like I was losing that comfortableness, if that's a word, a little bit. So I think it's a 4-star read for me, 3.5 stars. It's hard to say. I just really liked it and I definitely do recommend it. And then we have the book that I borrowed to a friend. It's called The Chestnut Man and it's by Søren Sveistrup. He's a Danish author. He's also the author of the book called The Killing, which also turned into a TV show. I haven't read that book, but I read this one. I was in the mood for a crime story. I found it for cheap in the bookstore. I bought it, I read it, I really loved it. I think this was the perfect crime book for me because I was in the mood for that genre and I just felt like it was flowing very well, and it had some cliches when it comes to crime stories, but it dealt with those cliches in a fast-paced and interesting and intriguing way that I just really liked. The Chestnut Man is basically about some murders, because it's a crime story, but these murders also come with a chestnut man. Every time they discover a new corpse, they find this little chestnut man and they don't really see the connection, but suddenly they do, and it's many destinies entwined, and it's just a really interesting book. And it's also about memories, relationships, hiding your secrets. I think it's got a lot of those things that make for a good crime story. I was impressed, and I think this was also a 4-star read for me. Yes, it was. Before I get to the last book I read this month, which was also my favorite book of the month, let me just tell you about the half book I read, which was Salems Lot by Stephen King. I read it on my Kindle. I got halfway through it, as I was saying, because this was one of those books that I was enjoying and I liked it, but I was so unsure about whether I wanted to invest so many hours on this book, because even though it was good, it's also a little bit silly. It is a horror story about vampires coming to life in this city, and it's about all these people that realize gradually what's going on, and they start being bitten and they turn into vampires themselves, all of those things. I hope I'm not saying too much right here, but this, I kept on reading and reading and reading, and by the time I was halfway, I felt like I had already read a complete novel, but that was only the halfway point, and I wasn't invested enough to finish this book. I felt like I needed a story that was a bit more substantial to life, a bit more about real people and real situations, and this one was just an escape that I didn't really need at this moment. So for now, I have DNF'd it. It's not that it's a bad book at all. It just wasn't grabbing my attention these days. I did actually look up the ending on Wikipedia just because I was curious enough to find out how everything would end. But I shouldn't have done that maybe, because I might finish this book later. I don't know yet, but the ending wasn't too surprising to me, I will have to say. So I'm pretty okay with not having finished this book, because what I did was that I picked up this book that was so phenomenal that I completely forgot about the Stephen King book, and I was just head over heels in love with this one. And that is A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery, a big chunk of a novel which has been standing on my shelves for 5 years maybe, and I don't know, I just felt like I was in the mood for this substantial story about real life, real people. This one is set in India. It's about a different culture and different ways of living, which I just find hugely engrossing to read about. And it's also about 4 people whom we follow over these 600 pages. We get to really know their backgrounds, we get to know them as they meet and their destinies entwine, and it's also a comment on Indian society after the individuality, the separation from Britain in 1945. It's about that period afterwards in which they had to come together as a country and figure out how to continue this country and how to stabilize life for everyone, and they weren't doing a very good job of that. I really love this book. I was so invested in the characters, in the country and the historical aspects. I really love this book. As I said earlier, I think this is one of my favorite books of the year so far. So highly recommended. I really love it. It's breaking my heart just thinking about it. It's definitely not a very happy story. This is one of those heartbreaking novels that are important to read, but you have to be prepared for it when you do so. So that was all of the books I read in May, 6 in total, which I am completely happy about. I have so many books lined up at the library which I have ordered and which are waiting for me to be read in June, now that the libraries are open. So I am so excited about the upcoming month. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up, and until my next video, happy reading!